So in this video, I wanted to talk about one of my most versatile lenses and why you should maybe consider adding one to your kit. And that is the Sigma 24-70 f2.8. Now there's a couple reasons that I've found this lens to be particularly useful to me, and the main one is going to be that it's a good enough focal range for most things. It's wide enough to replace most of what I use on my 16-35, and it's long enough to most of the time not need anything like a 70-200 or my 135mm prime. Although most of the time I just use it as a 24-35 and a 50 all in one. This focal range makes it really useful, and it just kind of covers a couple of things without having to switch lenses and without having to carry multiple lenses. So the next main reason is just that f2.8 is fast enough. And most of what I'm going to talk about in this video is about how this lens is enough. It's not really great at anything, it's just kind of good enough at everything. And so that's kind of the main underlying point with this lens, is that in any kind of 24-70 f2.8 style lens, and that's just that it's kind of good at everything, but it's not really great at any particular thing. And so that's just it, that it's good enough. And so that versatility is really what makes it great, because it's not going to be quite as good at shooting video as something like my manual vintage primes or maybe a cinema lens, and it's not going to quite be necessarily as good for photography as something a little more compact like a photo prime, maybe a more modern autofocus one though. And so the main benefit just kind of comes down to everything being fit into one lens, and so you do have to make some sacrifices, but it's going to cover 80% of whatever you need to do in one single lens without changing lenses and without having other lenses. And so it's not really very specialized at any given thing, and so that's what makes it great, is that it can kind of just be a very prepared lens so that you can go into any situation and you know you can get something. Now obviously if you go to shoot wildlife you might struggle, so there are times on the extreme ends of things where you might need a different lens, but the great thing about this is that for most typical scenarios it's going to work. And so coming back to my point about f2.8 being good enough, it's not quite as fast as something like an f2 prime or an f1.4 prime, but honestly in most shooting scenarios I wouldn't really shoot at that anyway. I would prefer to stop down to 4 or maybe even 5.6. A lot of times I shoot this 24-70 at f3.2 or 3.5, and so yes, I could get an f4 lens and shoot it wide open, but 2.8 is going to give you a little bit more, it's going to allow you to gather a little bit more light if you need to, and by the time you stop it down to f4, it's going to clean up quite a bit more than a f4 lens wide open. And so really, if you're concerned about f2.8 not being good enough in low light, don't be. It's plenty good enough, unless you're in very extreme niche scenarios where if you know you need it, then you probably will have to look at a prime lens. And so this brings me to my third reason, and that's just that you don't need to own or carry as many lenses because it covers so much. So rather than carrying a 35mm prime and then a 50mm prime and then maybe a 135mm prime and having to switch between them all the time, it just makes things a lot simpler to have all of it in one. One of the big things is that I don't have to change lenses during a shooting scenario. So if changing lenses might cause you to miss a shot, then that's what can be great about this, is that maybe you might not be able to specialize as much and get as good of an image as you could out of a prime lens, but you might have to in order to get the shot. This is especially important in fast-paced environments if you're shooting something like sports or really like event photography or anything, especially client work where you're being paid to get that shot. Then you need to get it, and it's not so important about getting it as well as you possibly can like you would with a prime lens. And so personally for me, most of the stuff that I do in my personal work, I can afford to say I'm just not going to take that shot unless it's perfect. I can kind of nitpick and I can get things as good as I want to. And so for me, I have that luxury of using whatever lenses I want in some scenarios. And so I do prefer to use these, but if I am doing something for professional client work, it is nice to have that versatility and to just knock out everything. And even if I don't know what I'm walking into, I'm just prepared with a 24-70. And so coming back to that first point, I do think that in the future, I would consider selling off my 24-70 because it isn't great at anything particular. And I do just enjoy shooting with these prime lenses, these vintage photo primes a lot. So having a set of them, especially for video production, would be really nice. If you know you can't switch lenses, you had to show up with just one, I mean, it can really help a lot to have just one lens and just do everything on that lens and not have to change lenses during an event or whatever the shoot is. And so while in the future I can see myself potentially selling this lens off to get something a little bit more specialized, it is really nice to just have one lens that can do it all. Especially for my YouTube channel, being able to do my thumbnails and my product photos and then show up and do whatever other genre I want, just everything can happen on the one lens. It's really, really helpful. Especially if you're doing photo and video hybrid work where you're switching back and forth between the two, having just your camera body with a 24-70 can be extremely powerful as a combination, because that's just going to be extremely capable for everything. You can quickly switch between photo and video and knock out whatever shots you need without switching lenses. So there are definitely shooting scenarios where you'd benefit from just using prime lenses instead, but you kind of have to know what you're doing and you're specializing into those niche scenarios, whereas a 24-70, you can just use it for everything and you're just prepared for whatever comes your way, which is really, really awesome. And there's a certain level of peace of mind to that, so it's really nice to show up to an event and just have a 24-70 and you can cover everything. So those are the 3 things that make this my most versatile lens in my kit. Let me know down in the comments if you think the trade-offs are worth it to own a 24-70 and give up those specialized benefits of something like a prime lens or a manual focus lens or a cinema lens. Do you think it's worth it to have those better low light capabilities and just better image qualities? Or would you rather prioritize the versatility of the lens? Let me know down in the comments below. Otherwise, that's all I have for you today, so have a great day and happy shooting.